a lot of people expect, just throw me a pill, man, and make this better. And it's like, that's not how this works. Like with trauma, especially, there's so much work that you as the patient have to go through in order to unravel that complicated trauma and rebuild those healthy neural pathways. And that medication isn't going to get to. You need to do that work in therapy. So the fact that you're working with a therapist who's suggesting these alternative pathways for you is great.
You're listening to Make Some Noise podcast, episode number 430 with guest Dr. Sasha Hamdani. Welcome to Make Some Noise podcast, your guide for strategies, tools, and insight to empower yourself. I'm your host, Andrea Owen, global speaker, entrepreneur, life coach since 2007, and author of 3 books that have been translated into 18 languages and are available in 22 countries. Each week, I'll bring you a guest or a lesson that will help you maximize unshakable confidence, master resilience, and make some noise in your life. You ready? Let's go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm so glad you're here. You know what? If you are feeling like it, you can send me a DM or shoot us an email and let us know how you're liking this new theme framework that I'm doing here on the podcast. We're still on the first theme. I know you don't have that much experience. Neither do I. But I hope that you're liking the experts that we're having on and just what we're talking about. We are going to switch over into relationships in about a month. I have a lot of experts on around the topic of therapy and different modalities. And today's expert is no different. But I first wanted to tell you a little bit more about the Daring Way retreat that I have coming up. I have 2 of them actually. As to answer a question, like, what do we actually do? Like, what are you going to walk away with? And I want to first read to you the explanation that either Brene Brown wrote, or somebody in the senior faculty who's like in marketing. Okay, so here's how they explain. When I say they, I mean Brene Brown's team, the senior faculty at, I don't know what the name of her company is, whatever it is, BreneBrown.com. Okay, here it is. And I'm going to read it in my super professional voice. Excuse me. All right. During the process, facilitators explore topics such as vulnerability, courage, shame, and worthiness. Participants are invited to examine the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that are holding them back and identify the new choices and practices that will move them toward more authentic and wholehearted living. The primary focus is on developing shame resilience skills and developing daily practices that transform the way we live, love, parent, and lead. Scene. Okay, that is all great. But how I describe it is yes to all of that, and the Daring Way helps you not feel like shit. So when they say participants are invited to examine the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that are holding them back, that's the stuff that all of that is the stuff that I wrote about and how to stop feeling like shit. That's where that book was born. The people pleasing, the perfectionism, the, feeling like you have to identify as someone who's strong, the self-sabotage, the isolating and hiding out, the numbing out, raise his hand. Those are the kind of behaviors, emotions, thoughts that a lot of us sort of default into. And what the Daring Way helps you do is to, as they say, move them toward more authentic and wholehearted living. So what we do in order for you to, first of all, know what that is, and then help you practice actually doing it in your real life, is we identify your values. Like, what kind of identity do you want to have? If we're kind of looking towards, James Clear's, who wrote Atomic Habits, his language around, identity-based habits, like, what kind of person do you want to be? It's the same thing as values. What's important about the way you live your life? So we identify that. And then from there, we also talk about these obstacles that get in your way when shit happens in real life. Because it's going to, like the thought patterns that we immediately default to, or, do you get passive aggressive? Do you get quiet? Do you get sarcastic? Do you lash out? Depends on the person. Depends on the situation. So we go through all of that. And then it's also really about normalizing terrible behavior. Maybe that's not a great way of putting it, but we all do things and think ways that we're not proud of. And so this program also normalizes all of that. And it's not an excuse to keep doing it. But if you come from a place of compassion for yourself and many times compassion for others, it helps you kind of exhale and go, okay, I'm not broken. I'm not a total dick. I am just a human who's behaving because sometimes of trauma responses, sometimes because of shame, sometimes it's whatever it is that we don't like to talk about. And then we find new ways of behaving. And also, this whole modality and retreat is about holding space for your stories. If you want to share them around some things that have hurt you and that have caused you to behave this way, because when we put it all out there in the open in a space that is a container to be able to carry that, as the facilitator is me, yours truly, who is trained and has a lot of experience in doing just that. Again, it just allows you to kind of exhale and be seen and heard by other like-minded women and be seen and heard by me and normalize it, and allows you to keep taking steps forward and learning new skills. That's what this is. It's learning new skills to be able to cope with life, because sometimes life is hard and it hurts and we don't know what to do with things that are handed to us that are really incredibly hard to carry and deal with. So that is one way of explaining what the Daring Way is. If you go to the retreat pages, there's several video testimonials of women who've attended my retreats before, talking about what they learned, what their favorite part was. It's in Asheville, North Carolina. There is a recovery-based one. That one's in September. And that's at AndreaOwen.com/recovery-retreat. And then the other one, that's a non-recovery retreat. You can be in recovery and go to that one too, by the way. That one's at AndreaOwen.com/retreat. Those two links are in the show notes. And they're also going to be in my social media bio, as well as on the website. You can find it. Okay, today's guest. I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Sasha Hamdani. I found her on TikTok, as one does. And for those of you, it's not like Craigslist. This is not like a Craigslist doctor. TikTok is a social media channel where mental health is huge on TikTok, by the way. So I came across Dr. Sasha, and she talks a lot about ADHD, which we will get into. But this whole episode is not about that. I ask her about TMS because my psychiatrist recommended that I have it. I have not done it though. And we talk about genetic screening, which is something that I've always been interested in, and kind of like I had some misconceptions, if you will, about what someone can get out of genetic screening for psychiatric conditions and mental health, and some other topics around mental health. I really think you're going to get a lot out of it. I absolutely loved this conversation. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Sasha Hamdani is a board-certified psychiatrist and ADHD specialist. In addition to her private practice, she has a robust social media following across multiple platforms where she provides accessible and accurate information about ADHD. So without further ado, here is Dr. Sasha. Thank you for taking time out of your day with two toddlers to come and talk to us. I know. I know how that could be. You know what I'm the most interested in as we dive into this, mental health / self-care conversation. How did you get into this particular topic? Like, did you go to medical school and were like, I'm going to help people with ADHD, or did it just happen on accident?
So I have ADHD, like if that's not totally blatantly obvious. I was diagnosed in 4th grade, so pretty early diagnosis, but my parents were really worried about the stigma. And so didn't tell me I was diagnosed. So I went to a doctor, started medication, and actually school became really enjoyable and interesting for me. And I did well throughout school. I did so well that I got into this combined undergrad and med school. So I got into med school out of high school. started there, but that was the first time I was ever away from home and just sucked. I was terrible. Like my whole world collapsed. And, my parents were like, are you taking your vitamin? And I'm like, no, it was my vitamin.
Even when you were in college? So you didn't know still when you were in college?
I had no idea.
Okay.
I had no idea. So then they were like, okay, well, heads up. It's actually not a vitamin. It is medication. You have ADHD. So that was just like a lot to process all at once. And so then, going through medical school, like I just kind of went the opposite way. And I fought the diagnosis. I'm like, there's no way I have this. Absolutely not. Like, this is for hyper little boys. Like, no, this isn't me. And then as I went through and struggled with finding the right medication, finding the right modifications, by the time I limped through medical school, by the end of it, I was like, okay, I have accumulated enough experience that I think this is probably the field I need to go into. Okay. And then I went into psychiatry, and that's kind of how that started.
So it was fairly early on. I have so many questions. First of all, so you didn't go and get your bachelor's degree in biology or like a lot of people in chemistry or in medical school do?
It was all at the same time, which was great because it was fast, but also terrifying because if you failed out, in the first, if you made it through, it was a 6-year program. If you made it through 5 years, you wouldn't have any degree. So it's okay, what am I doing? It was horrible.
Oh my, stakes are high. Stakes are high. And I would think that that's a lot of pressure too with your peers.
It was a, it's hard. And, I don't know if ADHD is something that you struggle with or what your personal story is with that, or, if that's something that's if other people who have been impacted by that, but someone who's experiencing ADHD, was used to being the smart kid in high school. Yeah. That's that is what I built my identity around. I got plopped into this situation. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm dumb now.
I've never met anybody who wasn't told about their pretty significant mental health challenge. No, I wasn't diagnosed until earlier this year. And it's just now that I'm starting to put the pieces together and look back on especially my school life. So both of my children were diagnosed. My son was diagnosed when he was 5. That was 9 years ago. And then, which didn't surprise me, he's inattentive. And then my daughter started showing some symptoms, and we actually thought that she might have a learning disability because I did not suspect ADHD because her symptoms were different than my son's. So of course, I only had that frame of reference. So I was like, it must look like him, and it doesn't. So it must be something else. So we went through the whole process with a psychologist who specializes in learning disabilities and attention difficulties. So, and it came back clear as day, textbook ADHD, inattentive. And when my husband and I were sitting in her office and she's describing how it shows up in girls. And I almost kind of stopped listening, A, because the obvious, and B, because I saw my own life. And I was like, wait a minute, stop for a second. You mean to tell me this is what it looks like? And then all of a sudden I'm remembering how much I struggled, probably starting in middle school. I always had to have tutors. I always felt stupid. Then in college, I got put on Effexor because I had severe anxiety disorder and was having full-blown panic attacks, and somehow graduated with honors from college. And then just recently, the psychologist told me that a lot of times they prescribe Effexor because for some, it can help with ADHD symptoms. And I was like, oh my God, is that what happened? And then I got off it when I got pregnant in 2007. I got off the Effexor, and then I, have tumbled back. And anyway, all that to say, I think my life would have been different had I been put on medication.
Yeah. And I hear that a lot. I do hear that a lot, with ADHD, especially in women that get diagnosed kind of later, because that's so common, right? As a population, we are trained to think about ADHD as this diagnosis as a hyper little dude. That's what we're thinking about. And so generationally, there's this huge amount of women who got skipped because they weren't disruptive in class. They were inattentive, and they, it didn't impact anybody but themselves. Right. And then, a lot of times they ended up doing pretty well in school.
we become resourceful. I have found I learned my own systems. I was super resourceful. I could figure it out. I could find a way.
A lot of people with ADHD, very intelligent and resourceful. So you find these workarounds of the system. And plus, if you're blessed with a little bit of anxiety, I mean, that fear of letting people down, that kind of propels you going forward. So it's not that symptoms have abated or have gone away. You've just gotten better at hiding them. Right.
Exactly. Can someone have symptoms of ADHD but not actually have it? Like, what is it? Yeah. I make up that it's for doctors and psychiatrists, psychologists. It's tricky to kind of figure out like what's what. Is that fair? I know I'm not explaining it very well, but I came back with like a plethora of diagnoses, and she told me that it's tricky to like, where does your impulse control disorder start and ADHD begin? It's hard.
So it is tricky, but partially because like when people think about ADHD, they're very hyper fixated on just the focus component of it. And focus is such a multifaceted thing in that you can have focus difficulties from anxiety. You can have focus issues from depression. You can have focus issues from thyroid illness. You can have focus issues from tons of stress. Stress causes focus issues. Like there's so many things. Hormonal stuff causes focus
lack
issues.
Of sleep. Yeah.
Totally. There's so many things. So really what you're looking at for ADHD is you're looking at this constellation of symptoms that tends to be chronic over time. So it's not that, like, okay, the stress resolved and now my focus issues aren't really a problem. Yeah. It's not, I mean, it definitely can worsen in circumstantial situations, but this is something that's present at baseline.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which seems kind of like, I wonder if sometimes it feels like which came first, the chicken or the egg, especially like for somebody who's in college and it's finals week and it flares up. Okay. Interesting. I want to ask you selfishly and for my audience listening, talk to us about TMS, which is transmagnetic stimulation. Is it also transcranial magnetic stimulation? Is that another
transcranial magnetic stimulation? Yeah. Okay. TMS.
So my doctor wants me to try that because
awesome.
I seem resistant to, I have complex PTSD from a former relationship to actually back-to-back relationships that it happened over time. And it was awful. It's a long story. For another time, but it seems to be like it keeps kicking up and keeps kicking up. And I've had tons of trauma therapy and like somatic work. And what happens, my experience is that like I seem to get better. So it's a lot of 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, which is fine. And the progress has felt agonizingly slow. Yeah. And the medication now doesn't really seem to, and I also have impulse control disorder, like chronic cuticle picking, like that type of thing. Mm-hmm. And so no medication has helped that at all. No supplements, absolutely nothing. So she wants me to try this and I'm skeptical. And so can you talk to us? Like, what is it? Yeah. Who is it for? And then also what are the, I think I read somewhere that the results really vary. Mm-hmm. And that's what makes me like, oh, well, shit, I don't want to put all this effort in. And my insurance is crap and it's going to like cost a shit ton of money. So I'm like, right. Oh, so that's my experience so far with it. I haven't signed up yet. So talk to us about it. Shopify's already taken the cash register online, helping millions sell billions around the world. But did you know that Shopify can do the same thing at your retail store? Give your point of sale system a serious upgrade with Shopify. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers inline and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond. Get hardware that fits your business. Take payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point of sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/noise, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/noise to take your retail business to the next level today. Shopify.com/noise. I have definitely been in that place where my paycheck ran out before the next one got here. Life doesn't happen bi-weekly, so why should payday? The money you earn can be in your hands today with Earnin. Earnin is an app that gives you access to your pay as you work, up to $100 per day or up to $750 per pay period. Just download the Earnin app and verify your paycheck. Then access up to $100 a day as you work and leave an optional tip. Any money you access plus tips are automatically repaid from your next paycheck. You can use Earnin to pay for a girls' night out, a last-minute gift for a loved one, or even summer camp for the kids. Make Earnin a part of your financial routine and join Earnin's over 3.5 million customers who say things like, when I think about Earnin, I think about financial stability, security. It gives me a lot of peace of mind. Download Earnin today, spelled EARNIN in the Google Play or Apple App Store. When you download the Earnin app, type in noise under podcast when you sign up. It really, really helps the show. Noise under podcast. Subject to your available earnings, location, daily max, and pay period max. See earnin.com/TOS for details. Earnin is a financial technology company, not a bank. Bank products are issued by Evolve Bank and Trust, member FDIC.
TMS is really for treatment-resistant depression. I mean, that was what the primary diagnosis was for. Now we're trying to branch into different diagnoses. And depending on the machine, some have different qualifications. Some do generalized anxiety, some do OCD, depending on where you treat on the brain and how deep that penetration is going into. But basically, the theory behind that is instead of taking a medication by mouth and hoping and praying it ends up in the right area, like it passes through your enteric system, goes through your gut, gets into your bloodstream, passes through your blood-brain barrier, and gets exactly where it needs to go to kick off those neurotransmitters, we're bypassing all that. So we go straight to kind of the source and then hyperstimulate that area with magnetic impulses to try and get those neurotransmitters to talk to each other. So basically, and it sounds really odd, but basically you're like for us in our office.
Well, I know you're explaining it to like the layperson. So thank you for that.
I mean, but like, I think this is how I understood it as well. When someone like explained it to me, I'm like, nope, don't understand that. Don't understand that. So this is how it was explained to me. So basically what's happening is like in our office, you're sitting and it kind of looks like a dentist chair and you have this, we map out the area of the brain. We figure out where to get this motor threshold to figure out where we're targeting. Then we hyperstimulate that area with this paddle. So you're basically like sitting and watching Netflix or whatever, and you have this treatment thing going on. Have you ever done an MRI or anything like that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. You know that clicking sound that's really annoying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's that. So really it's not painful. It's not anything. But it's annoying. It's for sure annoying. So you're getting this repetitive kind of tapping in bursts. What it's doing is quite literally, it's agitating those neurotransmitters into talking. And so over time, what you're expecting is that you should build and cement good neural pathways because you've kind of forged a pathway over and over and over and over again. It works well for people that, for whatever reason, they're not responding to medication. It works well for people that have problems with their gut. So taking medication by mouth is just not going to work. It works well for people that have difficulty with bridging something that psychiatrically medication hasn't figured out yet, like super high anxiety, but really low energy. Because if you try to boost up their energy, okay, now you're like this anxious psychopath. Or it's like, oh my God, my anxiety is so bad. So if you squash down the anxiety, now you're a zombie. So it's like, there's no, like, so trying to find that happy medium. So TMS is a good option for that. But there are a lot of people that can't do TMS, like people who have metal in their chest or their head or their neck or whatever indications you can't go through an MRI, apply for this because it's magnetic. People who you have to tread very carefully with, certain, depending on the machine you use and things like that, certain psychiatric diagnoses, we're like, no, okay, you don't want to treat that. So it's highly dependent on the person. I mean, and for each individual person, you're trying to assess, is this a good treatment modality? Now, in terms of the variability, I can only kind of tell you anecdotally what I've seen. Yeah. I really like TMS, but that's partially because I'm lazy. I'm lazy. because I don't really, to be totally honest with you, I'm not a huge fan of medication. And I know that's weird as a psychiatrist because I'm supposed to be throwing pills at you, but like, I don't like it. I mean, I think the generation of psychiatrists that graduated 10 years ago, we've had the benefit of brain scans. We've had the benefit of looking at longitudinal data about risk stratification with medications and things like that. So we have this healthy fear of medications. We don't want to keep prescribing stuff. We don't want to do super high doses because we know what it does to the brain. And we know, like, yes, if there's a time and a place, cool. But I think our rallying mantra is that we want you on the least amount of medication possible for the least amount of time, right?
That makes sense. And no, I'm curious about the results because what my psychologist told me, she said that she's only had one patient that did not respond. And she said he was inconsistent about going there because it's like 5 days a week, at least the place that's here in Greensboro, it's 5 days a week for 6 weeks.
Yeah. Same with us. So yeah, so it's 30 sessions. And then sometimes you have like tapers after that. Anecdotally, what I will tell you is that I've had pretty good luck with it. If you ask me my pre-COVID numbers and my post-COVID numbers, my pre-COVID numbers were way better.
Interesting.
And like, but after COVID, because like pre-COVID, I really didn't have a lot of like repeat TMS because people did well and it was fine. And then I think the pandemic just like kind of turned people on their heads and, you know, it was really difficult. And there was a lot of collective trauma that we were all dealing with. Even with that, I think a lot of people, what I would say is with TMS, I've never had someone who's done worse ever. Okay. Like if you're treating the right thing, you really should never have that. 40% of people we treat and they do awesome, like absolutely awesome. And then our goal of TMS is that, you know, we try to wean you kind of lower on your medications or off, and we're actually able, or what I've seen with my patient population, that I've been able to wean them off medication and then I literally don't see them again, which is kind of a bummer, but great because I see them at the grocery store and we're cool. About 40% of people, we do the TMS, they feel great. We try to wean them off medication and they're like, I don't feel as great. But what the TMS did is it gave them the opportunity for the medication to work more effectively. And almost always we can get them on a lower dose. Those are also people that have pretty strong seasonal variations. So sometimes we can get them off medication, but then like if they get weird in the winter, like we address it with medication if that's the case. Or sometimes people do like maintenance bursts of TMS. It depends.
Yeah.
Then about 20% of them, we do the TMS. They do feel better. Absolutely none feel worse. But we still are kind of experimenting with medication, or they don't have a complete kind of resolution. For those people, you know, sometimes there's stuff like they're currently in a situation where there's ongoing trauma, or there's, you know, it's almost always kind of like this multifaceted thing. But, you know, that's just anecdotally from what I've seen from my own TMS kind of population, not curated and meta-analysis of the entire TMS population. But that's what I've seen, if that's what you're asking.
That's so fascinating. And I hope that in years to come, it'll get even more, you know, specific on what they can treat, and it'll just keep getting better, which it probably will. That's so interesting. I heard somewhere, and I cannot remember where I heard this, that most medications for anxiety, depression, things like that, it's sort of like if you need to change your oil, I don't know if this is a terrible analogy, like if you lift up the hood to your car and just sort of like spray oil all over the entire interior of your car and hope that some gets into the right spot, it probably will, but you don't know how much. I was like, so wow, it's kind of like a shot in the dark, I guess.
Oh my God, I hope not. I mean, who is giving you that analogy? No, I
heard it. I think one of my friends told me that lives in LA that they were trying to find the right medication for her son. And they were going through different medications, trying to find the one that was correct, and had also done that blood test or whatever, where you can you get the red, green, and yellow light of which ones are better. And I don't know. I hope in 100 years they'll look back on like this time and look at mental health and go, oh my God, remember when we were doing that? It'll improve so much.
Oh yeah, I'm hoping. And I think we're moving more towards personalized medicine just in the first place, because I mean, the old guard of like throwing stuff at the wall, that is obviously not the best way to go about things.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
so now
even
we
like electroshock therapy and like lobotomies, like Jesus Christ, that wasn't all that long ago. That was just a handful of decades ago.
we have electric shock therapy now.
Still?
Yeah. ECT. Yeah.
So who would be a good candidate for that?
The same people that would be a good candidate for TMS. I don't
Really?
personally do ECT because I don't like it. And I had a bad experience with it. The first time I did it in residency, someone because you're inducing a seizure, like you're quite literally inducing electrical current to kind of hyperstimulate those neurotransmitters, like what you're doing in TMS. But this is you're inducing, like the person is under anesthesia and the body does weird stuff. If you're like under anesthesia and you're inducing a seizure, anyway, he pooped. I've never gotten over it. I cannot do it anymore. Yeah, no,
I would want to wear a pull-up or something like to that.
I was just like, I cannot believe that because of something I did, I made him do this. No way, never again. And like, I have never done it again.
That's a bad experience. Yeah. Well, the only point of reference that I have for that is my grandmother, my dad's mother. And this was probably back in the late 1930s. Yeah. They had like fostered this little girl, and my grandmother, fell in love with this girl. They had her for a couple of years, and the little girl ended up going back to her parents. And my grandmother was devastated and went into this deep, deep depression. And they did electroshock therapy to try to get her out of it. And apparently, from what I understand from my dad and my uncle, she was never the same after that. Oh, and granted, that was almost 100 years ago. It was 80, 90 years ago. So I'm sure it's come a long way, and they probably vet people a little bit more carefully now, especially women.
Yeah. And so the thing about ECT is that even though I don't do it, I do recognize that there is it sounds absolutely hideous and archaic, but there is a time and a place where potentially it could be useful. And there's actually there's a lot of data showing safety being even better than medications in certain situations. So it's crazy. I don't like it. I also really don't like it because I don't like the short-term memory loss, and anesthesia kind of freaks me out. So, those are kind of my things.
Okay. Well, and I also watched Nurse Ratched too, which was
that's probably not helpful.
It wasn't at all.
Yeah.
I have to just remember that's not real. Okay. So what kind of questions should someone ask a medical professional before treatment, such as TMS or medication, or even going through genetic screening? Because we haven't even talked about that yet.
Yeah. So the thing about meeting with a psychiatrist is it's a really collaborative process. Like it's weird. It's not like seeing,
well, at least it should be a collaborative process.
It should be. It totally should be. Mm-hmm. And I think the thing that's now that I'm thinking about it, that probably every doctor should be more collaborative. But with psychiatry, truly, you're getting information from the patient's own experience. So they're the best gauge of what is going on internally for them, right? So you're trying to funnel that information and organize it and synthesize it in a way that you can formulate a diagnosis and then a treatment plan. So with that in mind, questions, I'll pivot from that a little bit. What I would say in order to prepare yourselves for that initial visit is, one, I think just kind of formalize and write. What I love when my patients do is write down your symptoms. Because a lot of times, having that clear cut, you get into the appointment and you get lost in questions, and it's hard for you to kind of pin down what's important to you, because what's important to the doctor might be completely different because they're trying to figure out what your symptoms are, but what you're experiencing is very different.
Right.
So they might be heading down the wrong path, and you're like, oh, that's really not that big of a deal. I really want to, this is what I need to focus on. So writing down your symptoms. And then the other thing is having a clear cut set of goals. This is how, cause a lot of times, I'll be meeting with people and I'm like, well, how would you want this to get better? And they're like, I don't know, I just wanted to get better. And I'm like, that doesn't help me. Give me tangible ways that this could improve. Is it that your sleep could get better? Is it that your appetite would be less? Is it what is it? What tangibly could improve? Because those are going to be our mileposts to see and assess if we're making progress. So those are the two big things that
That's
I
important.
would, right. And kind of gauging, because you want to build that relationship. So I guess you're not like, really, I wouldn't say that you really need to be responsible for asking questions, because the doctor is primarily going to be asking those questions. You need to provide answers and have a clear idea of where you want to go.
Good. Then I did it right.
Yes.
I had a note in my notes app on my phone. I started writing down as soon as my daughter got her diagnosis and I was suspicious of my own struggles in that area. Yeah. I started jotting down my symptoms, even if I wasn't sure that they were ADHD related or not. And they were symptoms that I thought weren't typical, and they could have been anywhere on the spectrum. I even wrote on there, like, how furious I get when people are walking too slow and I have to walk behind them. Like, and I'm not even in a hurry.
So annoying.
Like, there's no rush. And I still am like infuriated. And even just last night, I follow a couple of people on social media who are experts in autism, because my son was diagnosed back then as well. And the toe walking, I thought that toe walkers, anyway, I toe walk, but only in bare feet. Huh. And specifically, especially if it's on cement, always, like, the feeling of cement on my entire foot is like, so just odd things like that.
Yeah.
And actually my psychologist asked me that same question. She's like, what are your goals? Like, out of all those symptoms, just so we can have like some expectation management, what do you want to change? And for me, one of them was nightmares from my complex PTSD. I want them to stop. And that's what hasn't stopped. And that's why she wants to send me to TMS. So I'm like, well, fuck.
Well, no, it's good. It's good that you're getting like a comprehensive management. And you know, the other thing is with PTSD, it's a lot of people expect, like, from the psychiatrist side of things, right? A lot of people expect, just throw me a pill, man, and make this better. And it's like, that's not how this works. Yeah. Like with trauma, especially, there's so much work that you as the patient have to go through in order to unravel that complicated trauma and rebuild those healthy neural pathways. And that medication isn't going to get to. You need to do that work in therapy. So the fact that you're working with a therapist who's suggesting these alternative pathways for you is great.
Yeah. And some days, like, I think, is this just my normal now? Like, just, am I going to just have nightmares for the rest of my life? And nightmare might be a little bit dramatic. Like, sometimes they're nightmares, and a lot of times they're just dreams with people in them that I don't want them to be in them anymore. They're from my past, who were my abusers. And it's been an interesting 15-year journey. I'm also curious about genetic screening. So what does that entail? Like, is there like a website you have? Like, how do people even start that process? And why would they?
So genetic screening is something that really came on the market maybe like 10-ish years ago. And it's had a complicated history because it has, come onto the market, and then people were really into it, and then it fell out of favor for a while because people were like, it's not data driven, and then they got more data. So it's been this very it's been a roller coaster following this kind of journey. Sounds like it's been a roller coaster, like more so in academia. And well, I think in academia, and also it, like, bleed over in terms of like clinical relevance, right? Because even starting in academia, if you're like, okay, well, I don't know how valid this test is, you're obviously not going to use it for your patients. What I will tell you is that on face value, the genetic tests we have available now, and our office uses a couple of different kinds of genetic testing, I like, and and that's actually kind of a polarizing topic between our partners. Some of our partners are like, oh, I don't use this data, and some of us do. And I think the reason for that is because I think that the genetic test is not what everyone thinks it is. Everyone expects a genetic test to give you like, this is my dream medication. It's not. It's not going to tell you that. What it's going to tell you is, these are the things that you're not going to be able to metabolize. So these are bad. And then the rest you could kind of pick and choose from. So there's a chance that your genetic data will come back and it'll be like, you're totally fine. Like genetically, you can metabolize all this stuff. So it doesn't give you a whole lot of clinical data. So people are like, I don't know if you really want to go through the song and dance of like trying to, because insurance almost never covers it.
Right.
And depending on the company you use, it may or may not be expensive, or sometimes they have a sliding scale. But sometimes people are like, I don't even know why we'd be kind of like, it's not giving us that much good clinical data. What I will tell you is that for people that are super freaked out about starting medications, they've never started a medication. So I feel like there's some clinical value in like, okay, if you're freaked out, let's do this first and figure out which ones are absolute no's. So then we could take that off your plate and be like, okay, well, if you try one of these, at least it's not going to be awful. Like, let's go from there. Or versus someone who's been on tons of different medication and, there's one or two left. And then it's like, okay, well, do we see, like, is there a reason for this? Like, does the genetic data tell us that like you just are blacked out, like you don't have the genetic capacity to metabolize this class of medications and we need to do something else? And some people just find it like validating. Like, I knew Effexor didn't work for me. I knew it. Like, things like that.
Okay. Interesting. I thought it was something else, but I'm going to ask you about that. I wonder if that has to do with, in my questionnaire, when I was going through all of my testing, I was asked about caffeine. Like, do you metabolize caffeine easily? And I absolutely do not. Like, I am the person who cannot drink caffeine after 11 a.m. I always say like, or I'm dancing with the devil. Like, but my husband, on the other hand, can have like coffee after dinner and be asleep in a half an hour. And I'm like, what is that like? Because I love coffee, but it's just the experience of it. So that's why she doesn't want to put me on a stimulant. And I have a history of substance abuse addiction. So I also don't want to be put on a stimulant. Also, I have found that, and I bet if I had genetic testing, it would have told me something about this, or maybe it wouldn't. I have found a couple of medications, mostly for anxiety and depression. Celexa was one of them, and Zoloft did the same thing, where I felt better depression wise, but I was like completely emotionally muted.
Blended.
And as a writer, I noticed that I was like writing things and it was just like the facts. There was no emotion in it. And it was as if I couldn't in real life be demonstrative with my emotions. I didn't cry, I think, at all the whole time I was on Zoloft. And there were moments that happened where I'm like, I should be crying right now. Like in my real life, I would be crying and I wasn't. It was like I couldn't access them to write. And normally writing is the way that I do that. It's the pathway. Yeah. If I can't figure things out, I will start typing. Is that a sign that maybe it's not a good fit? Or is that just sometimes what happens with medication that is actually good for people?
It depends. So that's so SSRIs in particular, they are notorious.
Is that the name for that? SSRIs, you said. Okay.
SSRIs. So things like Zoloft, Lexapro, Celexa, they have something called SSRI apathy syndrome, where you just feel blah.
I felt like I lost my Andrea-ness. That's how I described it to my doctor. Fast forward to the end of 2024 and think about your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If you want to learn a new language, you absolutely should get Babbel. Don't pay hundreds of dollars for private tutors or waste hours on apps that don't really help you speak the language. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons are handcrafted by over 200 language experts to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. Babbel's designed by real people for real conversations. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Now it's so easy to speak simple conversation phrases with the guy that takes care of my lawn without having to consult language apps. Here's a special limited time deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/noise. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/noise, spelled BABBEL.com/noise. Rules and restrictions may apply. It's hard to find a great mentor who can help me level up. My dream mentor, Shonda Rhimes. So I was really excited when I heard she has a class on Masterclass. With Masterclass, you can learn from the best to become your best. Masterclass is the only streaming platform where you can learn and grow with over 200 plus of the world's best. For just $10 a month, an annual membership with Masterclass gets you unlimited access to every instructor. And you can access Masterclass on your phone, computer, smart TV, or even in audio mode. I'm always looking for ways to be a better writer, so I took Shonda Rhimes' screenwriting class. It helped me gain concrete technical advice, including structuring, the writing process, and with shows under her belt like Grey's Anatomy and Bridgerton, it was so helpful. Plus, every new membership comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Don't wait another moment to start your learning journey with Masterclass. Right now, our listeners get an additional 15% off any annual membership at masterclass.com/Andrea. That's 15% off at masterclass.com/Andrea. Masterclass.com/Andrea.
Yeah, a lot of people say that, they feel emotionally blunted or things like that. So sometimes you can have that. Now, what I will tell you is, does that mean that that's a bad fit for you genetically? I don't know. Okay. Sometimes that is, and sometimes it's a dose dependent thing. Sometimes it's a gut related thing. Sometimes it's a symptom related thing. So sometimes it might be the right medication for you, but because of other stuff that's going on, it's almost like it's a protective mechanism for that. So it's a
lot of variables.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought genetic testing too also encompassed, like if you have on your DNA strand, so for instance, my dad struggled his entire life with anxiety and depression pretty bad, like to the point where he had to be hospitalized a couple of times and it was awful. And I always felt, and I remember talking to my siblings about this, I always felt like he never got his meds quite right. And so I thought the genetic testing would tell you that, like, yes, this is in your DNA, that, the depression lives here on the allele and you got it and it's bad.
No. And a lot of people, they think
that's what I want.
God, I know, me too. Like, I would love that. But I think and that's what a lot of people think is in genetic testing, but genetic testing has nothing to do diagnostically. It is simply for the medications. Okay. So it's not going to tell you that
are
you are depressed. Are they
trying to find that? Like, is there research happening where they're trying to find that?
So the problem is believe me, man, this is something that everybody wants a piece of, right? Mm-hmm. Because like, if we could crack this, I mean, first of all, I wouldn't have a job, but it's fine.
Well, because that would I think just might change. Yeah.
My job would change.
Well, I think too, people want to know and God, then we get into like trying to make these like designer children and things like that. But, things like perfectionism, like I've heard that there are theories that the perfectionism hangs out around the same area that anxiety does, like in our genes and things like that.
The fundamental issue with gene testing in order to find diagnoses is that diagnoses, one, are so multifaceted. And two, we're looking at such complicated genetic data, which can complicated genetic data in terms of like depression could really fire on like tons of different things and depending on how it's expressed. And so it's not just like, oh, it's like a 15 X chromosome. That's where it is. It's like, no way. This is like so complicated. It could present in tons of different places. It could be, you get a little bit of it from your gut. You get a little bit of it from your, how you're breathing and your jaw placement. And like, there's tons of different variables that makes depression kind of difficult to not only manage, but diagnose because, it's hard.
Well, and the ACE score, like childhood trauma probably plays a huge role in that as well.
Yeah. You're trying to diagnose a constantly moving target. And that's why it's difficult. Now, what I will tell you is that it would be interesting. Like our only hope at finding something like that out is to do longitudinal and like generational studies of people. That's really where we're going to get like hereditary data. But as of right now, I don't know anyone who's successfully done that. Oh, you could do that.
Yeah, that sounds like it would be a century long. I would volunteer. My dad passed away, unfortunately, but I could tell you a lot.
Yeah. Yeah.
I could talk to you forever, but I want to ask about you. Wrote a book that's coming out soon and it's called Self-Care for People with ADHD.
Yeah. Yeah.
And where do you want people to go? Do you want them to follow you on social media?
Where you could follow me is going on to Instagram or to TikTok to the Psych Dr. MD. Or you can like type in my name, Sasha Hamdani MD, and it comes up. That's a good resource for information about ADHD. And yeah, this book is coming out. Simon & Schuster is putting it out, I think, in October of 22. And that is, I'm actually really proud of that. I think that's a good resource. And when I was writing it, I wrote it in the viewpoint of like, this is what I wish someone had given me in medical school when I was like really floundering, which actually reminds me, circling back to something we started like right in the beginning. And I don't even know if it's appropriate to circle back to that. So, you asked me a question and then I got distracted and I went off on another tangent. You asked me.
Well, I think I asked you two questions at the same time, which is terrible for someone with ADHD. I should know that. I should know better.
God, you shouldn't put us together. Okay. So one, the thing you asked me or like you brought up is like, I don't think I've ever met someone whose parents kept their diagnosis from them. I mean, as a parent, and you're a parent, I think one of the most interesting things about this diagnosis in particular is like, and as I've kind of grown and like seen it both as a patient and as a student and as a clinician, is looking at that stigma and how different it is for women. And how, you can carry that with you. And like, for a long time, I was really angry with my parents and I felt very betrayed. And then, you become a parent and you're like, no, this is like something that they thought was best to protect me during that time. Yeah. And I've really understood as I've started growing with it and exploring it. So I think what I like about how I wrote this book is that it is written in the view, literally, I wrote it like, this is what I want in med school, because it is what I am proudest of, is that it's a way of explaining things in a shame-free and guilt and stigma-free way. Like these are the facts. This is what made, when I was writing it, I'm like, I feel better about this. This is a way of me absolving myself of that stigma. So that's awesome. What I like about it.
I find it just fascinating. And I can see, I mean, this is no shame to your parents. I totally understand why they did it. Like I really struggled with, when do I tell my son about his diagnosis? Because he was only 5. And I know there's some kids that I've heard, especially in the autism community, where they don't tell their children. And that's a personal choice. And I don't think that's not for me to decide whether you decide to tell your children that or not. But I can see now, especially with this younger gen. Did you grow up 90s?
Thank you so much. No, I mean, I was born in the 80s, but yeah, like formative youth was in the 90s. Yeah.
So it's still very much like a little boy's thing. But I have found, especially on TikTok, that this younger generation, I guess it would be like the younger Gen Z and Gen Alpha, growing up in a completely almost like opposite world of how we grew up, talking about trauma and mental health diagnosis. And now I think the pendulum has swung maybe a little bit too far and people are dissecting everything and like being hyper aware and hyper observing. And it's interesting, but I don't know. I think there were probably some benefits to you not knowing.
So too. And the more I've kind of gone about things and learned, and like, I think when I started this pathway down psychiatry, I had some proper discussions with my parents and I was like, what is this? And how am I supposed to move forward from those? How much of this was like me being drugged into performing and how much of this is my actual capability? Because I literally have no idea. The way that they described it to me was really important. They were saying, we gave you, we didn't want, we tried the best we could and we wanted to give you the best chance of moving forward. But at that time, we didn't know how to explain this to you because you were such a sensitive little kid. And to me, that really resonated with me. And that's one of the most important reasons to have that good working relationship with your psychiatrist and your therapist, because they're the people that are going to help you and bridge that gap. As a parent, you don't have to know how to have that conversation. That's not your job. You didn't go to school for that.
Right.
Like if you feel like that's something that you need help with and you want to explain to your kid and you have this vision of how it's going to be and you want to handle it delicately, work with your provider.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much for your time today. Yeah. And it's Dr. Hamdani, MD.com, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes. and the book, Self-Care for People with ADHD. Thank you so much again for your time. And everyone listening, thank you for your time. You know how much I value that. And I'm so grateful that you choose to spend some time with me and my guests. And remember, it's our life's journey to make ourselves better humans and our life's responsibility to make the world a better place. Bye for now. Hi there. Swinging back by to say one more thing. You know how I'm always giving advice over here on the show and on social media. And a couple of those things is that I'm always telling you to ask for what you want, be clear about it, and also ask for help. So I am taking a dose of my own medicine, and I'm going to do that right now. It would be the absolute best and mean the world to me if you reviewed and subscribed to this show, Make Some Noise podcast, on whatever podcast platform of your choice. And even more importantly, it would matter so much if you shared this show. Sharing the show is one of the few ways the podcast can grow, and that also gives more women an opportunity to make some noise in their lives. You can do that by taking a screenshot when you're listening on your phone and sharing it in your Instagram or Facebook stories. If you're on Instagram, you can tag me at Hey Andrea Owen, and I try my best to always re-share those and give you a quick thank you DM. And also you can tell your friends and family about it. Tell them what you learned, tell them a really awesome guest that you found on the show that you started following. Whatever it is, I appreciate so much you sharing about this show.
I'd like to introduce you to the Minimalist Moms podcast. It's hard enough being a mom, and the last thing you need is stress from too much stuff and an overcrowded schedule. For too long, I lived with the mindset that bigger was better, and the more I added to my life, instead of feeling better, I felt overwhelmed. It was time for a radical new mindset. Less is more. I'm not into extremes. I didn't throw everything away. My brand of minimalism is more about adding than subtracting. Get rid of the excess to make room for what you love. In other words, it's about living life with purpose. I hope you'll listen in, and my guest and myself can inspire you to think more and do with less. The Minimalist Moms podcast, available wherever you listen to podcasts.